How many of you get spam calls all the time? There you go, right, everybody? Yeah. Don't answer it. Don't say anything. As soon as you say hello, they have that little bit of your voice. They're going into a model now that can generate all the words that they need to pass through the financial institution security. So it's emerging. It is becoming a threat. And then the next thing is, well, what else can we deploy to kind of combat this? So I'm Daniel Silva, Director of Analytics in the Chief Data Office. I'm also a board member for the Institute of Data Science at NJIT. Before we try to figure out how to combat fraud in like life insurance, annuity, in that space, kind of need to understand how the product actually works. And then once you figure out how it works, you got to think how a criminal can take advantage of it. So you have a policy owner, right? And just by a show of hands, how many just have life insurance here? Anybody? Okay, quite a vast majority. All right. So typically, most, I would assume, went out, took out a life insurance on yourself, to get coverage. So you are the insured, right? And two things happen after that. Once you get a policy, you pay premiums to the company, right? And you have to elect a beneficiary. And Prudential, where I work today, we sit in between that, right? So we manufacture the product, we sell the product, and we service the product. Meaning we manufacture the life policy, we sell it to someone who purchased it, that's the policy owner, and then we have to pay out the death benefits to the beneficiaries. And there's a lot of work involved in that, to making sure we know who's who, because out of a show of hands, how many of you updated your beneficiaries probably more than 5 years ago and never looked back, or don't really look at that? Yeah, I see a lot of hands, right? So that creates stale data. That's hard for us, because then we need to figure out. And what's worse than that is when the data becomes, some people don't actually list, let's say, their children. They'll put children of the insured, or they'll put other titles down. And then we have to figure out, well, who are these children, right? And this is why entity resolution is important. But right now, when you're looking at here, if you count the entities, you kind of have two, right? You have the policy owner, because it's also the same as the insured, and you have the beneficiary. But what happens if the insured is somebody else? What if one spouse takes a policy on the other spouse? You just introduced a whole new entity in there, right? And this can get messy if they get divorced, and then the addresses change, people change, and whatnot. But one thing that's constant in this, let's say this is pretty well defined when you set up the policy. You have an owner, you have an insured. The hard part then is the beneficiary. What happens if there's new people in the picture? Now we have to pull in all new information. And this is part of the process that we go through on a regular basis. I typically will see about, for unique changes, between 5,000 to 10,000 records per month, and just the unique changes. And you multiply that by the number of policies we have and everything else. It's actually a pretty small fraction in a way, but they're new entities that we have to resolve. There's all new little pieces of new information being introduced. So now that we know how it works, we need to understand the fraud that goes through it. And going back to what I was saying before, we're Prudential. We're actually nearing 150 years in a few months. We're going to be celebrating 150 years that we've been around. So that sounds great. Yeah, I know. Round of applause, right? It also means there's a lot of issues that we have to deal with, and I'll go into that a little bit more. But one thing that has made us last 150 years is because of we call our rock solid promise, right? We're out there trying to make sure that we create the trust and we have the financial stability to honor the contracts that we put out there for our customers. So to understand the fraud, we need to make sure that people are not listing themselves as beneficiaries that shouldn't be beneficiaries. We need to make sure that we can combat account takeovers and other fraudulent means, and we'll go through that a little bit more. And it leads to significant losses. So the nice thing about Prudential, and when we do uncover fraud, that's our clients sometimes have no idea that's going on, and it happens with identity theft and whatnot. We do the right thing. We always make sure that they're made whole, but it's at a loss to us, right? And these are the type of things we're dealing with. That's that's the one side of where, the customer had no idea, and then, they were taking advantage because of identity theft. But then you also have people opening up applications with fake information, just trying to get a benefit out of it, using fake identities to make claims and whatnot. All right, so we got a little bit of an understanding. Typically, when you talk about insurance fraud, and this is the problem we have when we always get vendors, we get people, we can help you with all your insurance fraud. First thing they're showing me is, look, this is how we can uncover fraud when someone submits an auto accident claim. Like, yeah, I know we say insurance, but it's not exactly the same. In some cases, when you look at the data, maybe you could find similarities in something, but for the most part, it's a different type of scam. And in the life insurance annuity scam, we're not talking about like a $5,000, $10,000 claim. Sometimes we have $10 million, $20 million claims, even more, can get up there in the 100 million side. So you want to make sure you know who you're doing business with, and make sure who you're going to hand that money over to. So examples of fraud. This is why I want to take a little bit of time to really go through it. And I put this in 3 different buckets. We'll go through each one. But internal fraud. So employees taking over accounts. Yeah, that happens in a lot of financial institutions. There was actually one case out of New Jersey that was just sentenced in the last few days. What happened? The employee came in. First thing they did was start looking up all the high net worth clients. Then they changed the email address to an email address they made up, and started corresponding with that email address, pretending to be the client, say, hey, take out all the money and put it in this account, so that they had a paper trail. They learned the process. They found the clients that had the net worth, and they started deploying that. This actually went on for a while at this other institution. And it wasn't until a client said, hey, where's my money? What's going on here? That's when the internal investigators start looking at it and trying to figure it out. And because of the amount of money that we're talking about here, the feds were involved at that point. And unfortunately, it happens. I've worked in the financial industry for a long time, and I've seen all sorts of cases, and the fraudsters get creative. But you kind of first think, well, what kind of safeguards did you put in place? Well, there was definitely a trail. They saw the changes when an email address was changed, but they don't know who that email address belongs to, right? What they probably, my mind started thinking of, because I don't know any details of the case other than I saw where the person got sentenced and what they did. So my mind starts racing. Wow, how do I combat this, right? First thing you kind of think about it. So there's different ways to do that within the data. The other one is redirecting disbursements to shell accounts. That's another issue that a lot of insurance companies face. So what that means is you're supposed to get a benefit, and instead the representative forwards that money to their own account. And so that's why, again, it's in the data. You can look at a bank account. Any company should realize that when you have disbursements going out to the same bank account hundreds of times, there's probably something fraudulent going on there. But occasionally this could happen, and this is why you want to take a good look at it. And the other example kind of comes down to financial professionals. And honestly, this is where my job initially took me. Was an old process that we had, was for compliance purposes, we have to make sure that financial professionals are not listing themselves as beneficiaries on their clients' policies. Sounds like a conflict of interest. Well, it is. But in some cases, it's valid. So that can create some, false positives. Now, we have a whole process in place. This isn't unique to just Prudential or any, it's all major insurance companies have this, where, and I've come face to this in the past too. I had a client, older, saying, I have no family left. I have this life policy. Why don't you just take it? I'm like, no, I can't do that. Technically, I could. Legally, I could. But ethically, I said, no, I shouldn't do that. But in reality, that money just gets escheated to the state, and the state takes it over because there's nobody. It's considered abandoned property. So in some cases, yeah, they can, legally do it. But we're looking for the ones that are sneaking their way into those policies and saying, hey, you know what, this person wanted me to have the money or whatnot. Client fraud. This is the second bucket. So this is where you have people opening up multiple policies. One of the things we introduced many years ago was what we call our jet underwriting. And what that means is you go online, you can go get a life insurance policy, and show of hands. I mean, you just went online, filled out a form, and you got a policy, right? It's pretty simple. Yeah, quite a few. Other ways of doing it, you just go through a producer. But what happened when you introduce this online, you'll have Jim, Joe, John, same person, just different names start applying. And they're doing it for multiple reasons. They're doing it because they're maybe the first time they went through, they didn't get the preferred pricing because they answered a question wrong, or they're just trying to open up a number of policies in order to get the benefits, because over certain thresholds you get automatic underwriting, meaning you don't have to go through full medical if it's a small dollar policy. And the other issue too you have to look at is comes down to like identity swapping in that case. Like, oh yeah, you had the wrong name or this and that, let me just update the information, or trying to change things after the fact and as a correction, there was a mistake. The other fraud we look for, human trafficking rings. Yeah, in life insurance. So I'll have to explain this one a little bit in detail, but you sometimes have the same owner and beneficiary, but a different insured. And this leads into money laundering. So we uncovered this in the past, and again, we're not immune to it. It's uncovered this across other companies. But what ends up happening, you think of one person that needs to get rid of a lot of money. So one of the products that a lot of insurance companies offer is a variable type product where you have your a portion of the proceeds you put in there get invested, right? And then later on you could tap into those proceeds. That's where you're able to borrow against it, or withdraw after a certain age or whatever. And it's what we saw once upon a time was someone who was bringing in people from other countries to work for them, opening up policies, using them as the owner of the policies. They were the beneficiaries of the proceeds, and they were funneling the money that way, making premium payments to hide the money. And that is a little bit trickier to find. We were able to uncover it because of the data, and luckily we were able to get ahead of it before there was any real damage done in that case. And in other cases with the human trafficking is the flip side, where they're opening policies on behalf of other people. They're, again, similar situation, bringing them into the country and opening policies for these people, and then those people disappear. And they wait a while and do that. That still happens today, believe it or not. They do get caught. It's rare that doesn't happen, but they do. External fraud. And I kind of put this a little bit separate from the client, clients, they're clients, but it could be external. The account takeovers. We're not immune to this. We see this all across the financial industry. This is a huge issue, and it's getting very sophisticated, and I'll go a little bit through that in detail on another slide. But what do they do? They get your stolen credentials, right? They're buying your information on the dark web. They're going through, they're using social engineering, and they're able to figure out where you work, where you went to school. They're getting all that information from there, and they're able to take over your account. Now, a little bit more in depth in how that works. From what I've seen, especially from the social engineering aspect of trying to get your information, it's the ability for the people to actually get your picture off, let's say, a LinkedIn profile. So they can create an ID that matches that. And they're also able to understand who's in your network if you have that open, and basically then trail from one person to the other, figure out, okay, where did you go to high school, what's going on. The other thing that they're doing is calling up call centers, trying to figure out all the security questions that are being asked, and I have another slide on that we can go through, but it gets pretty interesting. So now that we've kind of covered a few examples that we'll discuss, the data, contact information, names, both domestic and foreign. So we have clients that are international. They give us a name that they use here in the US. They have a different name that they use in Asia, for instance, and vice versa. Social security numbers, where they exist. And I say that because we're an international company. SSN is unique to the US, but there's other identifiers here and there. Date of birth, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, IP addresses. This is how we get all those multiple applications coming through. They usually come from the same IP address. So this is some of the data that we're collecting. Business registration data. This is where this scam artists get very creative. So if they know, like, okay, they're going to be looking for that name, that address, so what do? They set up an LLC. They'll set up a trust. They'll try to hide behind that. More recently, we're now requiring that we know who the principals and benefactors are of those trusts and those LLCs so that we can get individual names and document that. We're also verifying the addresses where they're where they're registered, and I believe I have that part of third-party data as well. P.O. box registrations, that's the number one way people are hiding, is P.O. boxes. And they're getting a little bit more sophisticated, so they'll go to a UPS store and just put the UPS address, not the P.O. box. So they don't have to put a P.O. box in the address field. However, that's part of the third-party data that we do receive, is a full listing of all the P.O. boxes in the country where they're registered. Other pieces of third-party data that we're getting is ID verification, where I think everybody kind of does that in the financial world. Registered advisors, so every professional has to be registered by the government. So we get a full listing. So regardless of if you're a registered advisor with Prudential or New York Life or any of the other insurance companies out there, we basically have that full list, and that's part of the data that we feed in there. And you'd be very surprised, because when you register with the government, they're asking for two pieces of information. What's your home address and what's your work address? All right. We ask the same thing internally. I can't tell you how many times I come up with 4 different addresses for the same person. And it just kind of boggles the mind of, okay, which one is updated, which one is not updated, or are they in fact, do they have 2 addresses and they're just listing one home here, one home there? And those are kind of the questions we sometimes have to figure out. Other data we get, believe it or not, funeral home data, nursing homes, and even state Medicaid. We have to get this information of how they list these entities and the addresses affiliated, because there are scams that, fraud that does occur in some of these places. And in some cases, on the state Medicaid side, it's a little different on how that works. But typically, if you're basically saying you're poor, you can't afford medical service, you have to sign over any assets, things like that. We've seen sometimes instances of fraud where somebody might sign over someone else's policy or things like that. It's rare, but these are things we do look for. Emerging data, social media, public records. So it's really interesting, the amount of information that's being out there, and we're trying to collect this as we go through the process. So as a client gets onboarded, hey, what's your LinkedIn profile, or do you have Instagram, Facebook? And we're not going there really to check out your Facebook page or Instagram or anything like that. It's just another way of contacting you. I highly doubt people are changing their handles, or especially their LinkedIn. They're not changing that quite that often. So it gives us another way of contacting our clients, but it also helps us understand who's linked to that entity. All right, got the data. How do we link this? That's a lot of data, right? So 150-year-old company, ball of yarn, thumbtacks. Anybody know where this is going? Murder wall, right? Well, you think about it, this is entity resolution, right? You're figuring out this person is linked to this person, and then they're linked to this person, they're linked to that, they're linked, this is how we resolve it, right? And sometimes you have to take a step back and actually think about this and figure out, like, how do we want to make this work? So when I started this process, I created my own entity resolution model to combat a lot of this stuff. So I had to sit back and think about, what are all the possible ways? How can we make all these connections? Luckily, didn't really have to take this approach, but it's that's essentially entity resolution. So being 150 years old, what are some of the issues that we have? Well, we have siloed data, and this is a huge issue, and we're not unique to this. Again, multiple business units, each have their own databases. Sometimes for regulatory purposes, one database cannot talk to the other. We have client records across all these business units. And again, they can't talk to one to the other because of privacy or because of the regulations in place. So this makes it a little bit harder. For the purposes of compliance and ensuring that we have proper things in place to combat fraud, we are able to tap into systems in order to prevent that. The legacy data, I can't stress enough, how many of you would say you have a lot of legacy data? You have either paper documents, yes, everyone's kind of like, it's incomplete data, right? Some of it, and this is the problem we have. We're, again, 150 years old. We do have policies that are hitting 100, right? Beneficiary is John Smith. That's it. Just John Smith. How do we find John Smith? Who is John Smith? Well, it's back then you weren't, when I say back then, I'm talking several decades ago, you weren't required to put down social security numbers or any of this information. We don't even have date of births for some of these beneficiaries. So it goes back to the old thing of how many of you have updated your beneficiaries and all that. Yeah, that's part of the issue that we face. So why entity resolution? Why are we doing a POC right now with Senzing to figure this out, right? There's actually quite a few things this solves. When you look at enterprise this old, we want to get a better view of our clients, right? We want to understand, our clients have a life policy? Do they have an annuity? Do they have a group insurance product? Are they invested under our investment asset manager, under PGIM? What does this relationship actually look like? And you think, well, why this is important? Well, you're dealing with your financials, right? We want to ensure we have the proper background in order to make the right decisions. And that really helps her, understand the relationship better. We also want to be able to see the attacks before they're visible. We want to be able to scan those IP addresses, understand that, hey, someone keeps trying to file a life insurance application under the same IP address using different names, different email addresses, voice IP. We actually have a way of knowing, is that number coming into the call center? Is that from a voice IP number? Is it a temporary cell? And we also want to be able to look at fax numbers. We still accept things faxed. Sometimes people fill out claim forms and they fax it. Again, we have policies getting up to about 100 years, right? They're going to mail it in or fax it over. So, and then there's regulatory, right? We have a fiduciary duty to our clients, and also we need to show that we're taking the proper steps to safeguard our clients and doing the right thing and to limit the losses. Abandoned property. Now, this project came about during the POC, and I thought it was the most interesting aspect. How many of you are familiar with abandoned property? No, just a few, right? So there's national sites out there. Anybody can search for it. And you can basically find out if you forgot about an account or there's assets from a relative that's passed on, and you put in your name or you put in their name, and you will find the abandoned property list. Now, how does that occur? Well, essentially after, I think, about 6-7 years, we can't reach out to somebody. We give it to the state. That's just how it works. So it gets sheeted to the state, and we said, hey, we can't make contact with this person. No idea if they're dead or alive. And we have no idea who the next kin is, for instance. So that money sits there until someone comes forward to claim it. And that becomes an issue. So why is that important to us? Well, we make a promise to our clients, and part of that is to make sure that we put the money in the right hands. So we try to find the beneficiaries. And in some cases, when we started running this process internally, part of this, the whole entity resolution process, we found that because our data is siloed, we were able to put that all together and find updated information for our clients and get that information updated. We were able to save a substantial amount of money from being escheated to the states. Now, it was a win-win situation. In some cases, the client had no idea because it was one of those situations where a spouse opened up a policy for the other, and then one passed away. They just didn't realize it, and now they had extra money that it's their money. They're entitled to it. We try to do the right thing and make sure they get that. So that's just a few reasons why. Now, entity resolution in an AI world, and yeah, I hate using the buzzword, AI. I do that, but this is actually from the opposite end of it. And I'd say this: we're no longer trying to stay 10 steps ahead of the criminals. We're trying to stay ahead of the machines. It's machine versus machine at this point. And that's where you get the credential stuffing. You get your criminals trying to just, any piece of information they can get on the web, just trying to put it through to see what sticks, right? So biometric authentication. This is part of the account takeover process that we were dealing with. So how many of you have a financial institution you do business with that uses your voice as the authenticator? Yeah, quite a bit, right? So piece of advice, how many of you get spam calls all the time? There you go, right, everybody? Yeah. Don't answer it. Don't say anything. As soon as you say hello, they have that little bit of your voice. They're going into a model now that can generate all the words that they need to pass through the financial institution security. So it's emerging. It is becoming a threat. And then the next thing is, well, what else can we deploy to kind of combat this? But those are some of the biometric stuff that we're seeing. It's getting scarier out there. Security questions. Now, I said earlier, like, you kind of have to think like a criminal. So I have to kind of think, like, how can I use AI to defraud an institution? I can start asking it for security questions. So, hey, what are the security questions for this this institution? It'll give me a list. You can put any institution you want in there. Eventually, the list becomes kind of the same type of questions, but this is kind of how they're starting to harvest this data to use it against you. And the credential stuffing that comes in from that. So what we found was, for the account takeovers that we were dealing with, they would call in with a fake name, whatever, and just try to get through to a certain process where they understood the security questions being asked. Once they had that list, they would call back with the client that they had stolen the identity from with all the right answers. And that goes back to people listing all their personal information, or identifiers that they could find on public forums like LinkedIn or other social media. So borrow this here from Senzing, but this is why you kind of need the real-time entity in this day and age. You need to be able to understand who you're doing business with in real time. So as a new entity is being introduced into the system, you need to go through really quickly and understand who they are. And I say quickly because the account takeovers, it didn't take that long. They would call in, they had all the right information. Once they were verified, let me change that address. Once they changed the address, let me borrow against the funds. And we were talking policies with millions of dollars in there. They were getting checks cut. And, when you have that kind of fraud that's going on, you kind of have to go back, look at the data and say, hey, how can I split this up? And when this type of fraud was first being uncovered, and I was speaking to the investigators, I said, well, walk me through the scenario, what's going on. Once they walked me through it, I said, well, here's your 3 buckets. These are the accounts that are compromised. These are the accounts that I think are compromised, but you haven't figured it out yet. And these are the accounts that are next. And sure enough, they went through the list. And besides saying, thank you so much, yeah, you're right, they were able to stop the fraud quick in its tracks. The hard part, though, is trying to figure out these rings. These are international rings a lot of these institutions are dealing with, is getting back to, when we see where the money flows, but it's trying to get a handle of it. So this is why you need real time. As soon as you start seeing these patterns, and they all have the same pattern, they have the same facts, basically. Again, fax machine, right? They were faxing in documents, and that's how we were able to figure out how which accounts were getting compromised. Then there was other parts of the data that we were looking at, but can't go too much into it. But it was very, very, very interesting, to say the least. So that's basically what we're doing, what we're going through in terms of looking at the POC right now for Senzing, is going through all our data, finding patterns. I can't tell you enough, like some of this fraud stuff, it all comes back down to the data. That's all it is understanding your data. And does it make sense, right? Should you have 100 policies with the same phone number with different names? No. Should you have, multiple policies with the same social but different addresses? Things like that. And they seem obvious, but until you actually start pulling it all together, graphing it, showing it visually, you can look at it. And obviously you could put, rules in place after the fact. But it's, it's been an interesting journey, to say the least, to try to stay ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel.
All right.